Welcome to Glow State. I'm your host, Courtney Page. As a former executive recruiter, career coach, actor, and yoga teacher, I'm demystifying how people have designed the creative career and life that was meant for them, and how you can too. Now, for this week's episode, let's get glowing. Welcome to Glow State. Our Glow guest today is Carrie Lyn Strong of Strong Wine Consulting. Carrie started her career as a bartender at the Original Tao in New York City and made her way into the management side of hospitality, focusing on food and beverage before going into wine and her sommelier career. She has worked with Jean-Georges, Amanda Freitag, Jimmy Bradley, and Chef Michael White, all before starting her own wine consulting biz, Strong Wine Consulting. Thank you, Carrie, for coming on Glow State.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So the question that I always like to start with is, what is your answer to somebody at like a dinner party or out having cocktails or in your case, wine? What do you do? What do you say?
Well, gosh, what don't I do, really? The easy answer is that I'm a consulting sommelier, and that's not even easy in itself because most people don't know what a sommelier is, never mind are able to pronounce it. So essentially, I'm a wine professional. I have my own consulting agency. I started in 2015 when I was still working in the restaurant business as a wine director, but because I was working so frequently and the hours were long, I didn't have a lot of time to dedicate to the business itself.
Mm-hmm.
So the last couple of years, I left the restaurant business and moved out to central Pennsylvania after living in New York City for 20 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. They say after 10 years, you're a New Yorker. So I don't know what this I got as a 20-year New Yorker, but I'm now effectively living in central Pennsylvania, but I do go back and forth to New York City to do varying events and projects.
Cool.
So I do everything from online classes, in-person classes, private events, corporate wine events. I'm involved in event planning. I'm involved in marketing. So
You're like a wine jack of all trades.
It is. Yeah. And well, food and wine as well, events, etc. We just had the Marietta, which is the town I live in, garden tour. And so I was on for 5 hours just explaining all of my vegetable garden and all my flower gardens. And it really felt like I was back in the restaurant industry, explaining the food and the different wine and how the pairings worked. And it was rather comical to be back in those shoes, if you will, for a while.
Your own garden? Like you have a garden and you do, oh my gosh, that's awesome. That is definitely a difficult thing to do in New York City. So,
well, I was fortunate to have small gardens on rooftops of the rest of the, I almost said of the restaurants where I live.
Because you did actually live at the, so yeah, I want to talk about that. The hours in restaurants, you had said that you started your business in 2015 when you were still in restaurants.
Right.
I worked with Carrie. So that's how I know Carrie. We worked at the Mercer together in New York. And that's how I met her. She was my bar manager. You were the beverage manager. Yeah.
I was the beverage manager and I got to interview and hire Courtney.
Yeah, you did. You did. It was like my favorite interview ever. So, but it's no joke, the hours in restaurants. So how did you, even have enough time to hatch a plan, never mind go out and actually like market and get clients and all of that?
I didn't. That's why I did one major event for Tattinger and that was it for a while. And when the world closed during 2020, I had to pivot. That was the key word that everybody used. When the world opened up, I chose not to go back to restaurants and I chose to get married and so much. And we had my husband and I had created this garden and we did it for a lot of reasons. One, we wanted to do it anyway, but I had been visiting out here and started small half wine barrel, of course,
oh my
garden. it touches all aspects of my life, but I had been putting, small tomato plants, maybe small pepper plants and varying herbs. And I could, pico de gallo, or I could do a caprese salad. It was making or growing rather in those small half barrels. But when I moved out here, it made more sense because we had his teenage kids, and teenagers eat a lot of food. And I was cooking every day, which was relatively new for me, having worked in the restaurant business. I only cooked on the holidays with my mom. And so I started cooking literally every single day and got really into it, and felt that in addition to finding online recipes and getting ideas in this way, I dipped into my years of experience in the restaurant business and tasting new foods and learning about different pairings to create different dishes to keep it exciting. And we established a garden, and we started growing vegetables that I could literally cook with. And in some cases, we got sick of tomatoes or zucchini or whatever the crop might have been. So it was a way to save money. It was a way to stay occupied. It was a way to feel like I was continuing to grow and learn. And I used some of the things I learned by going to wine regions, and my tomatoes were growing, but they were going right to rot at one point, and I couldn't figure out why. Stood out there in the garden, and I kept thinking, this can't be that difficult. There's nothing wrong. There's no other rot. What is going on? And it took me a bit to realize that what was not happening was there was no airflow through the tomato plants. And so I had to trim all of the leaves, which is something that you have to do if you're growing vines.
Yeah.
In order to make sure that there's no rot in the grape bunches. And so as soon as I did that, it took me 20 minutes, and I cut all of these leaves and stems and opened up the airways. And it was so satisfying. It felt like a breath of fresh air. It literally was a breath of fresh air for the tomato. And I was able to grow. So it's just interesting how we've talked about how business affects your job, your career affects every day of your life, but it really can teach you things that brings you through your own life.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that brings up a good point. When you were a kid, what got you into wine? That it's such a niche profession. It's not something that, when you're a little kid, you're like, I want to be a sommelier. Like, that would be awesome. But when you were a kid, that was not a thing. I think I became more aware of what you were saying, working in restaurants, you become more aware of food and fine dining and wine and pairings and all of that. But before Mercer, probably, although I did work at Olive Garden, which has a phenomenal, they have a phenomenal steps of service. It's like their training is really great. Shout out to Olive Garden. But
you're lucky I hired you.
Oh my gosh. I know. That was a lifeline, man. No. But what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were a kid in New Hampshire?
I wanted to be a ballerina.
Okay.
But I am not flexible enough for that.
Did you dance? Were you a dancer or was it?
I did. I went to ballet classes 6 days or dance classes 6 days a week, including on Saturdays. I grew up in New Hampshire, so we were about an hour from Boston. So on Saturdays, we would take classes at the Boston Ballet School.
Oh, no joke.
Yeah. And it was tough. I had a friend of mine who went with me, and she grew up dancing with me, and she was way more flexible. And I was a year younger, and even though we were in the same class, and she just had the body for it, and I didn't.
Yeah.
So I have more body, and I'm very strong, but I knew traditional things. I didn't know how different modern dance could be, or that I could get into that. So I ended up in 5th grade. I tried, my parents had been raising horses, but they got divorced and they got rid of the horses. And so I loved riding, but I couldn't continue with those lessons. And so I started growing taller than the boys and got into basketball.
I was going to say either basketball or volleyball, right? That's what all the tall girls gravitate towards. Yeah.
Right. For me, it was track and field and basketball. And in the falls, I played field hockey, which I really enjoyed field hockey. But
yeah, I did. I was on JVB field hockey, and it was so fun. That was one of the most fun high school experiences ever.
It's like the lacrosse scene in Mean Girls, where she's able to get all of her And now field hockey is very similar to that.
Definitely. Yeah. And so you spent a lot of time in track and field. So,
Yes.
and
So
I know, like, if you talk to Carrie for 15, 20 minutes, track and field will come up. It's like so in your soul. What pulled you to that other than being tall was that it?
I had some athletic ability. I wasn't just tall.
I know, but
well, look, I've said this since I was a bartender. I'm sure I said this to you when you were a bartender. Bartending is the athletic sport. To be fast, you have to be quick and precise, and you have to have endurance. And for me, I was very good at track and field for those reasons. And I was a multi-eventer. So I started doing the heptathlon in 8th grade, which was younger than most kids start doing the heptathlon.
What is the heptathlon for people who don't know?
So the heptathlon is in college and in the Olympics. It's a 2-day event where the athlete performs the 100-meter hurdles, the high jump, shot put, 200-meter. And then the next day you come back and do the long jump, javelin, and 800-meter, which is the half mile. Well, in New Hampshire, there was a state competition once a year, and it was for the girl heptathlon. It was done in one day.
Oh my God.
I was good at hurdles. I was good at jumps. I wasn't that good at throwing. I got better as my collegiate career went on, but I always thought that I would go to school for basketball, but I was in a middle situation. I was big in New Hampshire. So I always played in the paint and down by the boards. Mm-hmm. But in real life basketball, like I'm 5'9", I'm a tall woman, but in real life basketball, that's not very tall at all. So I didn't have the ball handling skills. I could shoot, but I had a mean hook. I used to say that I had a mean Larry Bird left hook.
Nice.
But that didn't get me the scholarships that I really wanted. And I ended up getting some money to go to a very nice school, very prestigious school, Lafayette College. I got grant money to go for track and field.
Okay.
And it was an amazing opportunity to learn about the world, learn about different people, learn about different classes, learn about different perspectives. Mm-hmm. And I didn't go thinking, okay, I'm going to do this specifically. I went there thinking, okay, I have a job to do. I want to do well. And that's my pride. I wanted to do well in performances and sports, but I wanted to learn in school and do a lot of different things. So I ended up excelling on the track and field arena, but I also was able to take a semester abroad, and I lived in Dijon, which is the center of Burgundy. No idea at the time that I was getting into the world of wine later in my career.
Okay. And, interesting. I did not know that.
And here's a funny story too. When I interviewed at Tao as a bartender, I was being interviewed by the beverage director at the time, and I had to fill out a quiz. Everyone that interviews there has to fill out a quiz. It's a lengthy couple-page quiz on, you'll recognize these questions. What do you ask a guest if they ask for a margarita? What do you ask a guest if they ask for a martini? Mm-hmm. And what are 3 different white wine varieties? And what are 3 different red? And I had written down Aligote. And the beverage director, which was surprised that I wrote down Aligote, because most people write Pinot Grigio, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc. Those are very commonly known white wines here in the United States. But I said Aligote. And he said, well, how do you know that? And I said, well, I spent 3 months in Dijon, and we had a lot of Cure, which is a local cocktail coming out of that region. And he said, oh, wow, that's wonderful. You lived in France. So could you tell me the 2 major wine varietals coming out of Burgundy? And I could not. While I had lived there and consumed a great deal of wine at the ripe old age of 20, I was not paying attention to what the heck they were, even though they tried to teach us. I couldn't remember any of that because I didn't know that it was going to become so important.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's interesting that you chose Dijon. Like, what made you choose Dijon to go to?
I wanted to go to France, and my school offered an opportunity in Dijon, and they didn't offer an opportunity in Paris.
Okay.
So, I'd never been to Paris. I'd never been to Europe, and that was just an opportunity, and I took it.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. The study abroad opportunities at schools now are amazing. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking of whether or not to do it, it is such an incredible opportunity if it's available to you. And yeah, I had an amazing study abroad experience that changed my life. It's really great. So I love to hear that when people take advantage of those opportunities. And
I didn't have a lot of money.
They make it doable. A lot of schools will really try to make it doable for you.
Right.
I always like to know how people deal with different expectations. So either external expectations from either your parents or your teachers or coaches in your case, and your own internal expectations of what you think you should do as opposed to what other people think you should do and how you balance those out and pave your way.
It's interesting that you brought back up what I had wanted to do when I grew up. I wanted to be a dancer, and family can be funny. My sister liked to draw and my grandfather liked to draw. And so my sister was always the creative one, and I got good grades. And so I was the smart one and she was the creative one. And it used to bother me a little bit because dancing is very creative.
Oh, yeah.
And I was dancing so much, but there was it wasn't, I don't want to use the word stigma, but it's almost what it is because, oh, you're the smart one. Okay. That's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. But I think that people are getting away from labeling and boxing people into that they only have one redeeming quality or that's maybe the standout redeeming quality and that there are some lesser ones around. I see that, but I also see I have this wonderful, I love my nephew dearly, but apparently he's the best at everything. So like there's some balance. Like we have to know our limitations as well as
yeah.
So I mean but I think that one of the things that is hard to do is to look at yourself in the mirror and say, well, I'm good at this and this is where I need to shine and this is where I do shine. I had been, as a young child, I was extremely shy, extremely. And even in college, I didn't, even though I was performing, track and field is certainly a situation where you're performing. You
have a lot of eyes on you. Yeah.
Have a lot of eyes on you and you have to figure out a way to block it all out. And for me, I was able to do that. Perhaps having been on stage as a young person, that helped me in the track and field arena, but to be able to speak eloquently and with authority and to dip into my knowledge base and be able to communicate that is very intimidating. So much so that I didn't want to take a public speaking course in college. And a good friend of mine took it and he felt he had the same issues, but he got better at it and he encouraged me to take the class and I still didn't do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It wasn't until I was in advertising in New York City when I first moved there, I went into a course that was given by the advertising agency for kind of young and budding marketing executives. And I had to give a speech in front of the entire class. And of course, the instructor chose me first, which if there's the most intimidating time, it's to go first. Sure. I'm a very breathy speaker. And so it's hard to project when you're talking like this. And I was leaning up against the wall. I wasn't asserting myself into the space. And he called me out on that. And I was so embarrassed as a young person, but I was in a profession, I was in a career, but I was so intimidated, embarrassed by myself, not in a like, oh, I'm going to defeat myself. I'm going to go. It just sitting in that moment of embarrassment and I wish I were better. And then in that moment deciding I have to do better. I have to do better, not for everybody else, but I have to do better for myself.
Yeah.
I need to conquer this and I need to figure out a way to get over my fear, get over my insecurity and get over that uncomfortable feeling because it was.
Yeah.
It was comfortable.
And like recognizing that would be a major roadblock to go anywhere in your career. Yeah.
So we had to prepare our speech again and revise according to his critique and criticisms. And you have to not take that personally, which I think is one of the hardest things for me. I take a lot of things very personally. And I think it's hard not to. When you put yourself out there and then someone criticizes you, not personal, they say.
But it's me. Yeah.
So I took that next week. I revised how I wanted to tell my story or whatever it was that I was presenting. And I was probably sweating on the inside, if that's something you could do, and nervous as all get up. And I stood up, I commanded the space and even though I didn't want to, I pitch getting and my breathiness out. And I remember he said, when you speak in a higher tone and when you're breathy like that, you have to take your tone down an octave.
Yeah.
And
it grounds you.
And it does. It does. It's a feeling. And that to me is something it's physical. And that's something that athletics and dance always brought to me. And that's something, as I just mentioned earlier, that bartending and working in the restaurant business, it's physical. It's hard. It's demeaning, but you feel it. You can think it. You can emotionally feel it, but you also physically feel it. And so for me, it was always about the physicality of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. I'm not cerebral in the way that I can just sit down, not move, and just think things out. I have to physically engage and physically move and physically touch and feel. I have a hard time buying things online because I can't touch anything.
Oh my gosh. I know when the pandemic hit and all we were doing was buying things online, I was like, this is so weird. Like, I can't trust this. Yeah, like I need to feel it. So you mentioned marketing as your first, like how you got to New York. So I want to just go a little bit through how you ended up where you're at with your consulting business. So you started at Tao. Was marketing before that and then Tao?
Yes.
Okay.
So I moved to New York in 2000, and I got a job working for an amazing advertising agency, J. Walter Thompson, for a tremendous company. Well, they were the client. It was De Beers, which has now been sold to LVMH and now has their own retail store in New York City. At the time, because they were a monopoly, everything from advertising, be it television, out-of-home marketing, newspaper, magazine, and internet was a new thing back then.
Yeah.
That all was done and housed under one roof because De Beers had a monopoly on the diamond trade. So I was actually I worked on the budget because I am good at math, and I worked on the budget, but I was able to see how the money flowed from project to project, from category to category, and all the circles of what marketing is. And that was an invaluable experience for me because when it came time to thinking about a wine list, or when it came time to think about websites or social media, I had a leg up because of that. And I thought about verbiage, and I ended up being a studio artist. I graduated honors in studio art and a double majored with English. So
the non-creative sister.
The non-creative sister,
Sure.
right? Visual expression as well as verbal expression has become extremely important to me. And I think that it's become extremely important to people in general. Social media has brought a brand new way to communicate for a lot of people, and language changes. And I stick to my guns on grammar, but I realize that grammar changes daily based on trends.
Yeah.
And how people want to speak and how different cultures address language and what that means for different cultures. And that's really important to understand when you're communicating people. And so when internet became bigger for websites and when social media became more important for restaurants, I started thinking about those things. And then when the pandemic hit, that became a huge thing because I had to market myself more in a way than I ever had to before. And like being intimidated and fearing public speaking. So not only let me put this back into coming from me, not only was I having to communicate in a way that was different, but I had to then also boast about myself. It's one thing to speak about a subject that you're familiar with and do it with people and be nervous about communicating that. But then on top of it, I remember we said, oh, that's so personal. Then I was suddenly boasting about myself. Here's what's about me. Let me put that on social media.
Yeah. It's very exposing. Now it's like whatever you end up doing for work, especially if it's entrepreneurial in any way, it's very exposing. And as an introvert, I think you've self-identified as an introvert. How do you deal with that exposure from behind a phone? Like, it's a very different kind of exposure to public speaking where you feel it and it's like people are looking at you and there's a very physical component to it, as opposed to starting your own business and having to market online and having to have a social media now because it's 2023. Is that easier because it's not in front of a lot of people? Or like, how does that work with being introverted?
Well, I want to clarify. Introverted is kind of a label that I think polarizes what people are. Are you extroverted or are you introverted? And I never thought of myself as an introvert, but my sister actually sent me an article several years ago that really described what I felt and she felt was more my personality, which is to say that I am an extroverted introvert. I'm not sure if you've heard this before, but people think about introverted as almost being recluse, and that's what introverts are. Introverts get their energy from being calm and quiet, whereas extroverts tend to get their energy from being on stage and getting the audience and getting that attention. And so there's a gradation of types of personalities in between those two extremes. And somewhere in the middle, I lean towards being introverted because I need that calm and quiet
to recharge.
And recharge my energy from calmness and from quiet. That to me is part of the complexity that is my personality. And I believe that everybody has complex personalities and ways that they garner energy and generate and rest and rejuvenate to have the energies that they need. But I will say that I've always needed that kind of downtime. But for me, becoming the type of person that is able to present, promote, communicate in an effective way took time and effort. Working as a beverage director, a wine director, and teaching staff in a small way is like the steps. Actually, we had talked about this previously, and it's one of the ways that I was promoting at the Women in Wine Symposium years ago. How do you gain success? How do you move forward when things seem insurmountable, when tasks seem insurmountable? And it's just like track and field. In the high jump, you set your opening height and then you don't go, okay, well, my best height was 5'9". That's actually my height. Like I wouldn't set my opening height at 5 feet and then attempt 5'9". What you do, and this is how the competitions generally go, it goes up either in metric or in inches, depending on what continent you're on, but it goes up small increments. And so my advice to anybody that is looking to overcome any adversity, or even if that's fear, even if that's, oh, this task seems insurmountable, then don't take the whole chunk of it.
Yeah.
Go at small increments, just little bites, little digestible bites, little increments. And so for me, being able to speak in public, being able to, doing an Instagram live was wildly intimidating at first.
Yeah.
But small digestible bites in small increments, and you can build on that. So when I was working, you experienced some of my wine classes at Mercer Kitchen. It was 4 or 5 of us sitting down at a table and let me teach you about this. And then sometimes it would be a larger class of 20 staff members. And so now I gave an online wine and cheese and brownie table for 150 people. And that was intimidating, but I had been doing so many different lives where you don't know what's out there in the ethos. You don't know what's watching. You don't know who's watching or listening or how they're going to take your words or how they're going to digest your information. You don't think about that. You go smaller and then you just start interacting and then you get more confident as you go. It's not overwhelming in that way. So for me, I was able to take small bites and increase by small increments and then go back and take my time, my downtime, and rejuvenate in that way.
Yeah.
That I could comfortable going to the next step. And even if I didn't feel comfortable, it was, okay, jump in the pool.
But you had built up the confidence. You had instilled confidence within yourself because you had taken those smaller steps. And I'm wondering, I guess what I'm wondering is, did you find Instagram lives as intimidating as speaking on a stage?
Yes.
Yeah.
The reason is because when you do a live, you're talking to nobody.
Yeah.
And everybody at the same time.
Yeah. And when you're in front of people, there's a bit, in my experience, there's like more of an energy. You can feed off of it. And yeah. Okay.
For Instagram Live, you're literally talking to yourself.
Yeah. But you have to pretend you're not.
You're not. And you have to pretend that you're talking to somebody. A lot of times lives were done as interviews, similar to a podcast.
Okay.
And as the host, you have to log on and just talk because your interviewee isn't there yet. And I've seen so many where it's just silence. It's literally radio silence. Stop for a second. Don't say anything, Courtney.
Yeah, it's so uncomfortable. I can't do it. Well, they say it's like 2 seconds of no speaking or nothing on air, whether it's whatever medium. It's like death. Yeah.
It's a term for a reason.
It is. Yeah. Okay. So that's good to know because I think everybody, if anyone's listening who wants to start their own venture, social media is more than likely going to be a part of it. And it's good to know that that is a very common feeling of just, wow, this is weirdly intimidating, even though I don't even know if anyone's going to see it. And then maybe nobody does see it. And then you feel bad about nobody seeing it, but then too many people might have seen it. And then you're like, oh my God, what did I say? So that's all normal. So, right.
Right. Like you're so intimidated. There's such a fear-based, oh my gosh, can I do this? I don't know if I can do this. I'm talking to no one. Did I not say enough? Did I say the right things? Did I blurb up? I had one woman say, oh my gosh, you're so good at it. I would make so many mistakes. And I said, I make mistakes everything that comes out of my mouth is probably a mistake. No, but the funniest thing to me is when you are so intimidated and nervous and you think, oh my gosh, my internet's not going to work. I'm interviewing a winemaker from France and their internet's not going to work. Can I delete this? Should I not delete this? Did I make a mistake somewhere in the middle of an hour? And then you get so upset and nervous and stressed. And then like 5 people watch it.
You know, right? It's like you spend all this time and energy like freaking out. And it's like, oh, okay.
And then your mom pops on. It's like, hi, honey. Yeah. Why did I stress about this? Just my mom.
Because she'll pick out the thing that's...
Well, there's that.
No, but it's good because I just think that's something that holds a lot of people back from going after a certain venture. Also I know you and I have talked about this offline, but just like the boring stuff about creating a business, which I know you had to do a bunch of like weird tax stuff because you were in 2 different states. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because it is boring, but it's very important. So like, just to take people through. Okay. So you were at Tao and then you worked your way up and you were at a beverage manager, food and beverage manager. After you left Mercer, you were...
Okay, gosh, now I got to get my resume out.
So you don't have to go through your whole resume, but just to give people like, an idea of what brought you to consulting and opening up your own business. And then the hardest and easiest thing about opening your own business for people who are looking into that. But I always like to know what brings people to the point of wanting to like be on their own, because that's a big decision.
Yes. I had been a sommelier and beverage director for 15 years, as you mentioned, at varying restaurants, very high-end fine dining restaurants, very public, notable restaurants. I was the wine director at Oriole. I was a sommelier at I Fiori. I was the wine director at a restaurant for Jimmy Bradley, where I worked with Amanda Freitag, called the Harrison. I was the wine director at Bong Restaurant before Mercer Kitchen, and then Mercer Kitchen. And more recently, I was the wine director at Casa Livre, which is the kind of crown jewel of the Sant Ambrose group restaurants. So your Felices and Sant Ambrose.
Okay.
And I had thought about consulting for some time. As we mentioned too before, restaurant hours are very long, and being on your feet after a while, it gets fairly taxing, and you have to stay fit. And, your body changes as you get older. It doesn't always do the same things as when you're in your 20s.
You don't spring back as quick.
Well, and I don't know if you remember this, I had broken my knee.
I do remember that. Oh my God, I forgot about that. I remember you wobbling in on those crutches.
Yeah. I used to be the closing manager and I had to become the opening manager. So I went from being a night owl to literally being at Mercer Kitchen at 7:00 in the morning, which was in itself difficult, never mind hobbling around on these crutches. And I busted open my knee, and that really changed my body's propensity to recover. It used to be that I could wear heels, and I would try to wear heels when I was working as the wine director at Casa Livre because it was such a prestigious place and I wanted to look this certain part, and I couldn't. My knee, never mind, my feet wouldn't take it anymore, but my knee wouldn't take it anymore. And I used to wear heels working in restaurant, not stilettos. No, don't try that. But I did wear heels and wedges in varying other restaurants, and I would wear them for an hour or two and I'd have to change to flats.
Wow.
And so that's the body aging. You can't do everything that you wanted to do. So I had heard about a couple of people that were doing consulting and was inspired by them. Chrissy Petrullo is one of them. She is a big inspiration of mine. She was the head sommelier at Jean-Georges, and she left to open her own consulting company. And she's actually now going to be opening up a new retail store.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what she does. I had a love affair with like what she was doing. Like, oh, that sounds great. You can do all these different projects. And it brought me back to this idea of me being a multi-eventer and a heptathlete, that it wasn't just running, it wasn't just hurdling, it wasn't just jumping, it wasn't just throwing, it was all of it. And I wasn't the best at any one of those things, but I was pretty good putting them all together. And so I like to think about that's what I'm doing in my career now, is I'm truly living out this multi-eventer personality that I have to do a lot of different things, which is why I don't just teach wine. I don't just present wine, and I don't just do wine pairings, and I don't just do corporate events. I don't just do private events. I do a lot of different things. I am going to be teaching the WSET, which is the Wine, Spirits, and Education Trust here in central Pennsylvania, where they don't have a lot of wine schools. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping to start that at least by this fall, and doing a lot of different things for, like I said, event planning. I plan events for the Gary and Vivian Player Foundation, which is a charitable foundation. And I literally do online marketing, and I'm the restaurant liaison for Japanese Wagyu for the Japanese government. I get to do all of these different things and wine.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think you hit on two really important facts that people need to know whenever it comes to your career. One is actually three. The first thing that you mentioned a little bit earlier was this idea that there are careers out there that you don't even know exist. And that could be the career for you. You were talking about, we don't really put people in boxes anymore, which is, you're not just this one thing, but there are so many different careers that aren't listed on Indeed or LinkedIn or anything like that, which brings me to what you were just saying about Christy Petrullo. Is you saw someone doing something that spoke to you and ignited you. And instead of just like, oh, wow, that's really cool that she's doing that, but I'm stuck in this thing and this is how I have to make money. And you found somebody that was doing something that you wanted to do. And I think at least for me, perhaps, maybe others, there was always this idea of like, oh, well, they're already doing that, so I can't do it. Or they have more credentials than me, more experience. They are smarter than me or whatever. They are more connected than me. All of the reasons. But like, that's what they're doing. They already took that idea and now it's gone and it's theirs. I love that you were like, oh, that's what I want to do. She's doing an awesome job. I'm going to do it in my own Carrie Lyn Strong way, because that's my way. And it's going to be different because we're different people. And that's a really important thing. So if anybody is listening and you're struggling to figure out what you want to do, find anybody that is doing something and notice when you're like, oh, that's cool. I could do that. Like, could I do that? And just explore that kind of feeling. I think that's amazing. And the third thing that you've touched on, career around your personality, as opposed to trying to fit your personality within the box of a career. And I think you and I have that in common, where we have a lot of different interests. And a lot of the time, there's not one job for people, especially now. That's not really, you don't punch in and punch out. And when you're 65, that's not the way it really works anymore.
My mother was in the same job. The company changed hands several times over, but she was basically in the same job for 40 years.
Yeah. And which is crazy and
normal.
It was normal. Yeah. And I think for some people that's great, and they need that linear path, and that gives them a lot of comfort and stability depending on your personality. So I think it's just about really like understanding what you are all about and how you thrive, as opposed to really just, if you work against that, I don't know how you'll find happiness. Like, you just have to work with it. You can't work against nature. And I think you're a really shining example of embracing that.
Thank you so much. And another thing that I want to point out too is that just because you see someone succeeding, and this is certainly something that we see so much on social media, that people succeed all the time, they're putting their best foot forward. That doesn't mean that the behind the scenes are the same. Mm-hmm. At that point, I'm going to be starting to write articles for a local magazine here in central Pennsylvania. And I'm so excited.
What magazine?
It's Susquehanna Style.
Okay.
And it's just another one of those projects I can add. It's different and it's exciting and it's fun. And I was trying to get in touch with a restaurateur for the last 3 weeks. And I kept emailing. And I had been in touch with this restaurateur a couple months ago. And there seemed to be an interest, but I kept emailing in the last couple of weeks, and I had the date of the photo shoot and I have the deadline for the article that I need to write that I haven't written yet. And this person kept not getting back to me. And I thought, this is crazy. Why on earth would a brand new restaurant
not want press,
promote and get free press essentially? And I thought, oh, you know what? If I don't know restaurants and I don't understand like how restaurants sometimes work, then what is wrong with me? I do. Maybe that person is on vacation. Maybe that person quit. Maybe that person is too busy and can't read their emails, whatever the case may be. So ended up, I was very tired after the garden tour. My husband and I were, and it was very hot this past weekend. We were working in the garden for probably 6+ hours on Saturday. And then we woke up early. And then, like I said, we were basically performing to all of these people. I don't know. They were from varying towns from the area and performing. And this is what our garden is. And this is this. And this is how we do it. And this is so with these, and like remembering every single little flower and remembering every single plant that I had.
That's so cool.
Vegetable that I'm eating. And I was exhausted and I woke up really downtrodden because I thought, gosh, how am I going to get this article done when I can't even get the manager to respond to me? This seems like an insurmountable task. And I thought, I'm just going to call the restaurant because I thought I had an in. Right? I thought what I had was my in. And it turned out not to be. And so I called the restaurant. And of course, I didn't get a human. I got a voicemail. And I left a message and I stayed positive. And even though I was feeling inside, I was feeling not so positive. I came across as positive and I said, please give me a call back to whomever gets this message. I'm a freelance writer and I'm writing for Susquehanna Style. And we'd love to promote your restaurant and write a feature in the September issue. And so, Courtney, I'm not kidding. 3 minutes later, one of the managing partners called me back.
Nice.
And so I use that as an example of even when you think things aren't going your way, even when you think the worst is going to happen, or even when you don't know, how is this going to happen? How am I going to happen? There's just one more way. There's one more option. There's one more attempt.
Yeah.
There's one more try to make something happen. And more often than not, it's that extra, okay, think, why are these tomatoes rotting? There's got to be a way. There's got to be something that I have in my brain that I know how to do this.
Because it's pushing you to a limit to think outside the box. And sometimes you need to be pushed up to that threshold to get to the other side. And I think it's exactly what you're saying is that when you get to that threshold, you just take one more step, like just take one more step. And that's usually the step. And if it's not the step, just take another step. And if it's really something that you're into and that you want to do, it'll still be somewhat enjoyable. Like with your tomatoes, I'm sure that was still enjoyable. Would you ever grow wine? Would you ever do?
I don't think so. There are wineries in central Pennsylvania.
I know, yeah.
They're doing absolutely wonderful things. I love being in my garden. I don't want to make that my career.
Okay.
I don't feel like I'm expert enough in it. And it's something that helps me be calm. So I can go out in my garden and be calm. And if something works, it's great. If it doesn't, I can't grow cucumbers. I don't know why. Everyone else I talk to can grow cucumbers. And I love cucumbers. I would love to grow them, but I've tried for the last 2 years. And so this year I just thought, no, I'm not going to do it this year. I'm okay buying cucumbers. I have to be. They don't grow in my garden. I don't know why. And that's okay. Sometimes you have to accept your limitations.
And I like what you're saying is that like not every interest has to be your career. You can capitalize on the skills and talents that you have within your career and save something just for, it's like a meditation, basically what you're saying. And that's beautiful. I love that because I think a lot of people think of meditation as this, like, I have to sit and be quiet and om and chant. And that is one aspect. And that is something that a lot of people do to meditate, but it can also be gardening. I love the blue zones and all of that, all the studies that go along with it. And gardening is a huge part of longevity because you're out in nature and you're connecting with the land and there's something about growing something to nourish yourself. And that is so cool that you're doing that in Pennsylvania. Okay. I have like 5 like rapid fire questions and I did not, she doesn't know what these are. This is called the Afterglow and they're just fun. So don't think too much about it. But okay. What advice would you give your younger self and at what age would you give that advice?
That's not a rapid fire question.
Yeah.
Go. What advice would I give to myself? Probably to dive quicker into my career and not. I took a long time to jump into management, and I probably would have tried to do it a little bit earlier. I didn't really have that advice until my late 20s, and I wish I had it a little bit sooner. And on top of that, if going into the restaurant business, and I think it's a little bit different these days, but I would also save more money earlier on in my life.
That's good advice. See, rapid fire. That's great advice. What's the best? Well, I guess that is the career advice. What is the best career advice that you've ever been given?
I don't think that was the best career advice I was ever given.
Okay.
Because it came in the form of a bit of a negative. All my friends from Lafayette were in these big corporate career ups. And I was told, well, it's nice that you're a bartender now and it's fun, but you're going to have to get into management and get a real job.
Ooh.
And I took it with a grain of salt. And I did get into management and I realized that I had to. But I also thought to myself, I make good money as a bartender and I don't want to I knew I was going to have to take a 50% pay cut in order to get into management. I didn't want to get to a place where I was really comfortable with the amount of money that I was making so much that taking a 50% pay cut was going to be really emotionally detrimental. So I did it at a younger age. And so I think there's got to be time for fun, but I think there's also got to be time for planning. I don't think that I planned as well as I could have. And I just went with the flow. And that's very romantic. And I'm not unhappy with my career. I made very smart decisions. I stuck with very high profile restaurants and notable chefs. And that has helped me along the way to get to the next step. And I've learned a lot of different things by being in those restaurants and by having made those decisions. But in terms of advice that I receive, I basically have been describing the reason why I'm in consulting and why I reinvigorated my consulting company because of the pandemic and almost by accident. And that was the story that I told who I was. Going back to your original questions, what's your dinner party? What do you do and who you are? Was always almost apologetic. Like it didn't happen by my own volition. It was accidental because of what happened with the pandemic and because I moved to be with my fiance at the time, now my husband, because I couldn't afford my rent anymore because I didn't have a job anymore. And that was something that I hadn't chosen. That was not my choice. I did not choose to move out of New York. I did not choose. And that was the story that I was giving. But at this point in 2023, I've made a choice. It's my choice. I feel like Charlotte on Sex and the City. I choose my choice. I choose my choice. I choose my choice. But the advice was to be proud and to be confident in the choices that I'm currently making and not be apologetic as to how I got to this choice. But I choose every day to do what I'm doing. And it's hard because sometimes, projects don't come right away and it takes some time. 2022 was a bit more difficult and projects really didn't come in the way that I wanted them to until the fourth quarter. And so it was great. It was like a floodgate had opened in the fourth quarter, but in the first 3 quarters of the year, it's very difficult. And so it was hard. I think it was a hard pill to swallow for me to say that I was choosing to do that because I didn't want to, I'm choosing to not make money right now. It's awesome.
I love it.
But I kept with it and I stuck with it and I followed leads and I opted to do different things other than just wine. And that I certainly have chosen and that I've done on purpose. And that is something that I am proud of, not just need to be proud of, but am proud of and helps be successful in those tasks.
Yeah.
Those projects.
And oh my gosh, it's so great because what you just said, everything you just said really underpins what I do in coaching. My tagline is pivot on purpose. And it doesn't always mean that as soon as you do that pivot, money is just going to immediately flood into your bank account. There is some patience involved and some perseverance involved. But because when you own it and when you really own the decision of, okay, this is where I'm at and this is what I'm doing and I'm doing this on purpose. And I made this big pivot on purpose because I know that this is the thing that is going to bring me the most happiness. And if you stay patient and continue doing the work, I think a lot of people have this misconception that okay, I want to be happy and I'm doing all this stuff and I'm doing stuff on purpose and why isn't stuff coming to me? Like you still have to put in the work and do all that background gritty stuff.
Forget too, and this is to go with the idea of increments, baby steps, digestible bites. If you don't take those, other opportunities might not come.
Yeah, you have no idea what random little conversation is going to open up a crazy opportunity.
As I mentioned, I'm now the event planner for the Gary and Vivian Player Foundation. I started that as a single event sommelier doing a wine tasting. So Gary Player is South African. And so I brought in all South African wines for one event. And it was 5 days before my wedding. And they were so concerned when they found out that it was before my wedding. They said, are you going to be able to do this? So I said, this is going to be the easiest thing.
Yeah. After planning a wedding, you can plan anything, right?
As an event planner, I was just that person. I did it, And so I said, this is going to be the easiest thing that I do. And they loved what I did. And they invited me to be again for their event down in West Palm Beach in March. And because of the help that I gave, I had given some advice to the organizer of the foundation and Gary Player's daughter. And I said, this is how you need to organize a little bit better. This is just from me to you. I love working with you and I want to continue working with, but from my perspective, these things might be better if you organize away. And we had a great conversation and she basically said, I think that you need to be our event. And I thought, I've never planned a golf outing before. And she said, don't worry about it. I don't need someone that's planned a golf outing before. I need someone who's organized and who's a leader. And that's what I would never have gotten to this point in this project if I hadn't taken something that was a little tricky right before my wedding and then done the similar thing after traveling. And so there's always an opportunity. Just remember, there's always an opportunity. You just need to find it.
Yeah. And it's funny because I was talking to our mutual friend, Alex Wolf, in another episode, and he said something similar. And it just always comes back to this following your excitement. And what if you do that, I think that's where those little tiny like micro opportunities come up and they turn into bigger opportunities because you're just excited about it. So you're going to, like you were doing, like, I don't need anything in return. This is just what I think, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, oh, well, come on down and do this massive event. And you rocked it. Okay. What is the biggest misconception about wine?
This is my favorite. So the biggest misconception is that you have to know a lot about wine to enjoy it.
Ooh, okay.
Eric Asimov said in his book, and I should know the name of it, but I don't, but it's Eric Asimov was the wine writer for the New York Times for some time. He said that in America specifically, too many people apologize for not knowing enough about wine. And I'm paraphrasing, but he said, people don't apologize for not knowing how to plumb a toilet. They call their plumber. People don't apologize for not knowing how to do open heart surgery. They go to the cardiologist.
Right.
And I to be true when people would sit down in the seats at restaurants and I would approach the table, they would have this massive book and wine list and say, I'm so sorry, I don't know much about wine. And I would try to ease their fears by saying, that's okay. If you knew more, I wouldn't have a job.
Right.
The reality of the situation is what you need to know is what you like. And you don't even need to know that much about it. Just need to know what you like and what you enjoy tasting and what you enjoy
drinking,
putting in your mouth.
Right. Yeah, drinking.
Just because someone says that this California Cabernet, blah, 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 blah. If you don't like big, full body, robust, tannic wines, you're not going to like it.
Right.
You're just not like something because someone else says they do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's more of a life philosophy than anything specific to wine. But because in this country, we don't have the historic understanding and the day-to-day living with wine in the way that they do in many European countries. They don't have a fear about doctors and medical stuff. They pay attention to what the professionals say.
Yeah.
Just pay attention. Professionals say, and if it's out of your range, if it's out of your understanding, if it's out of your price point, don't go for it. Go for something that you're comfortable with. Go with something that you appreciate. If you're willing to take a chance, if you're willing to try something new, by all means. But if you're not, it's okay too. Just drink something that you enjoy.
Yeah. Okay. And if someone is going off of that, for someone who knows nothing about wine, but is like, oh, I'm interested in trying this out, getting a little bit more. I want to like impress my friends, whatever. What's your advice to them? What should they do?
Well, if you're in a restaurant, you can always ask for a taste of wine if it's by the glass. It's You can't do that if it's a bottle.
Right.
Like I've had people ask, oh, can I taste it before I buy the bottle?
You may not.
No. However, I will say, and this was from my restaurant days, that if I opened up a bottle, if I explained a wine to someone, even if they weren't paying attention, if I explained a wine to somebody and I opened it, poured it, they accepted it, and they tasted it, and on their first taste, they went, oh, this is not for me. Take it back.
You would.
Either I would, because one, either I didn't explain it to their understanding enough. And if it was on them, whatever. I don't care, because ultimately I want them to have a good experience. If them laboring through a bottle of wine is going to give them a negative experience, I don't want that. I don't want that in any way. That's a terrible experience, and I don't want people to have that.
Yeah.
So I'll take that bottle. Now, if they do that on the second bottle and the third bottle, then maybe they're not paying attention. I'm not going to be so lenient. But I want people to have good experiences. And if you come across a som or someone who doesn't act that way, they don't really understand what the wine experience is. And maybe you're not in the restaurant.
Right. Okay. What is next for Carrie Lyn Strong?
Well, like I said, I've got a lot of projects coming up. I've been getting quite busy, which is very exciting. And the newest thing is that I'm going to start writing.
Nice. So we can check out your articles.
I'm featuring local restaurants in the first article that I'm writing, but then I am going to be writing an article about Pennsylvania wineries in central Pennsylvania. That's going to be the October issue. So it's going to be fun. And there are actually, Susquehanna Style has a great online magazine. So you don't have to have the hard copy in order to find it. So
cool. And my last question, because I just want to clarify this for people who are like, what? How do you do that? Can you explain what virtual wine tasting is?
Yeah, absolutely. I've done private and I've done corporate events. So I did a virtual wine tasting for a friend of mine whose anniversary with her husband was happening. She's living up in New Hampshire and I'm here in Pennsylvania. And so we get wine shipped to the guest, any additives, whether it be cheese or brownies, as I mentioned earlier, any types of food and recommendations of food. And then you go on a Zoom meeting or whatever. I'm not promoting Zoom or anything.
Platform or whatever. Yeah.
Or you want to utilize. And then I'm there to assist you through the wine tasting. And I'll put together a PowerPoint presentation to explain a little bit about wine, how wine is made, what the different components are in terms of verbiage, the communication, what is tannins, what is acid, what is full body, light bodied, what oak tastes like, what different oak tastes like, where tannins come from, and how those things interact with and your palate, essentially. I've done that for 2 people. I've done it for 5 people. I've done it, like I said, for 150 people. So
cool. It's such a cool idea because when you had first mentioned that, you were like, oh, I'm doing virtual wine tastings. I was like, what? How do you even do that? But it's so fun and I want to do one. So maybe we'll do one. Carrie, you have been amazing and so generous with your time. Thank you so much. We're going to include your website in the show notes and your Instagram and all of that jazz. If you're in central Pennsylvania, you can pick up her copies of
Susquehanna Style.
And is there anything else local that your local buddies can go check you out at?
I tend to do wine dinners at the Railroad House Inn, which is a really cool restaurant in Marietta, which is a town that I live in. And if you're into gardening, my garden is out in the open. We don't have fences or anything like that. So I tend to be out there. And if you're walking by, I might give you a tomato or a zucchini or something.
Oh my God, it sounds so idyllic. It's so nice. So nice. Yeah. Carrie, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we'll talk soon. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Glow State. Please take a moment to subscribe to the show and then be sure to share it with a friend you know who would love a little glow in their life. I'll see you next time. Now, go glow.